This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Chinese President Xi Jinping laid out his vision of the Chinese dream and its worldwide impact as the curtain rolled down on the 13th National People's Congress session. President Xi assured the world that a great, a prosperous and strong China will be a contributor rather than a threat to the world. And as China is the continent's largest trading partner, Africa has been watching developments closely to try and learn from China's experience. So then, what challenges need to be addressed to further deepen China-Africa relations and take the win-win cooperation to another level? And what other lessons do China's two sessions offer to Africa? I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Chinese President Xi Jinping has reaffirmed his commitment to serve the people and fulfill his legal obligations. President Xi made the remarks during the 8th and final plenary meeting of the first session of the 13th National People's Congress. He stressed upon the wealth of China's history and the confidence he has in the country's future. CGTN's Han Peng reports.
As the top legislature passed a host of bills, work reports and budget plans, the president gave a speech.
It is a noble duty and a great responsibility to serve as a president of the People's Republic of China.
President Xi Jinping, who begins his second term this week, did not go into detail about his plan for the next 5 years. Instead, he spent much of his speech concentrating on China's past.
China has always been a nation with dreams, a moderately prosperous society and a shared future for mankind, a part of what the Chinese nation has been fighting for and dreaming about for thousands of years.
Following centuries of prosperity, the first Opium War between the UK and Qing dynasty in the mid-19th century was a turning point for the country, and it took China more than 100 years to recover.
Today, more than ever, the Chinese people are closer to realizing the dream of national rejuvenation.
Over the past 40 years, China has risen from a poor, industrialized nation to become the world's second largest economy. Chinese politicians believe the success is largely based on the country's political system and its determination to reform it for practical reasons. This year's NPC has approved a series of significant legislation to continue the system's development. Last week, the NPC passed a series of amendments to China's constitution, which includes articles to ensure a continuity in leadership and a more independent supervisory commission to fight corruption.
We must always be people-oriented. We must let the people be the masters of the nation. We must learn from our people, listen to their voices, and act on their wisdom. What the people advocate, what the people approve and accept must be the sole measurement of all of our work.
Xi Jinping also came down hard on the concept of territorial integrity, following U.S. President Donald Trump's signing of the Taiwan travel bill over the weekend.
Any action that aims to separate the country is due to fail, and will be condemned by the people and punished by the history.
Xi Jinping pledged that China would never seek hegemony nor expansionism, saying that only those who regularly threaten other countries would perceive other countries as a threat. Strong confidence but tough work ahead as the clock ticks towards the deadline from the ambitious 2020 goals. This government has essentially 3 more years to eradicate poverty, provide nationwide internet access, and create a moderately prosperous society for all. Han Peng, CGTN, Beijing.
Even as China's political season wraps up, much of what was discussed there has implications across the world. Nowhere is that felt more than in Africa, where trade volumes and relations have been growing consistently over the years. Leslie Mirungu has more.
Thousands of miles away, Africa was paying keen attention to the two sessions in China. Many were keen to see the country's achievements in the fields of economy and anti-corruption.
I think what's important to bear in mind about the Congress itself and the takeaways that come out of it is, what does this mean for the long-term strategy and plan for the Chinese government? Where is it that they're positioning themselves to in terms of the pragmatic policies and the question of one, as you say, to deal with the fact that you're going to become a very important economic actor in terms of GDP output growth, policy.
In about 40 years, China has changed from a semi-colonial, semi-feudal society to the world's second-largest economy, a product of good leadership, according to Naidu.
Chairman Mao made people stand up, Chairman Deng Xiaoping made people rich, and Chairman Xi Jinping is making China powerful, or making people powerful.
China has formulated a detailed development schedule which, coupled with the country's economic might, is conducive to maintaining peace and stability in the world.
I think the motto for China is leave nobody behind, and that's something that is aligned to Agenda 2030. Sorry. The other point to make is that I think there's also a strategic long-term plan, and that is for China to create the modern socialist state by 2049 to coincide with the 100-year anniversary of China's independence.
This year's two sessions saw the top legislature pass a host of bills, work reports and budget plans with a broad effort to push for reforms that will in the end ensure more accountability in governance. Leslie Marungu, CGTN.
Now, poverty alleviation was a major focus of the two sessions this year. And as China and South Africa are continuing to strengthen their relationship, the Chinese ambassador to South Africa has drawn parallels between the development of China and Africa, especially when it comes to poverty alleviation and unemployment. He spoke to CGTN's Julie Shire.
China has transformed its economy and the lives of millions of people in the last 3 decades. Unemployment is less than 4%, but more than 40 million people still live in poverty.
In our views, poverty is the only enemy in China. But in fighting for common prosperity, because if we are socialism, the common commitment is how to get there. Everybody get ready to sacrifice themselves to the nation, to the people. That is, we get developed.
South Africa and the rest of the continent are battling high levels of unemployment and poverty, despite having an abundance of resources.
We need to fight against poverty in the field, in the factory, for more production. So this is why my president, when he come here, he said, the main purpose for China to this continent is to help this continent to facilitate the industrialization and agricultural modernization. Because in our views, it's only the industrialization will create jobs and sustain economy.
China is doing well when it comes with new technologies as well as the artificial intelligence. I think South Africa has more to learn, and more South African students are going to China, and we expect Chinese students coming here, and we expect more collaboration in these areas.
As the world's second largest economy, China has become pivotal in the development of emerging markets.
One understands why Chinese want to extend the terms for the president, for stability, as well as ensure that policies that President Xi and his top leadership have had, particularly around the One Belt, One Road, requires a long-term leadership and consistent. The trading route in South China Sea are quite critical to South Africa and the continent.
Sino-South African relations remain strong. It promotes the development agenda between both countries and for Africa as a whole. Julie Shire, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
We're going to take a short break now, but when we come back, we'll have more insights into the links between China's two sessions and Africa. Stay with us.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Talk Africa, and now to offer insights into the lessons that Africa can take from China's 2 sessions, I have expert guest standing by in Beijing, Professor He Wenping. She's the Director of African Studies at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. In Johannesburg, Mithika Mwenda, he's the PhD candidate at the School of Governance, University of Witwatersrand, and with me in Nairobi, David Owiro, independent consultant, analyst of economic and political affairs in Africa. To you all, thank you very much for joining in on the program. Professor He, let's start off with you as you're monitoring all this from Beijing, because the 2 sessions now over. First of all, what were the key outcomes? What was your takeaway from the 2 sessions?
Well, I think those 2 sessions has been closely watched by Chinese and also by all of the world. I think I can get at least 2 things. Number one is I think now Chinese new leadership has been sworn in. So President Xi Jinping will continue, and all those like Prime Minister, so they will continue. This can guarantee this policy continuous. So all those policy has been put forward before, like One Belt, One Road initiative, and also like even China-Africa. This year we are going to have a China-African summit in Beijing again in September. So Foreign Minister Wang Yi has made this this analysis about our future, this summit issue and the future China cooperation in his press conference. So this is also good news for promoting China-Africa relations forward. And also like China's domestic economic development also has been fully discussed. So China will also continue to develop and make a greater contribution for this world economic issue recovery. Now China has contributed as many as more than 30% for this global economic growth. So with this contribution getting more and more, I think China will have more those financial resources and also our development experience for helping our African countries develop. This is number one, those determination, this policy. Number two, we have seen a new, like our government institution, that is the International Cooperation Agency, now has been finally announced, will be, will established. This is also very good news. It will guiding China's those foreign development assistance. So before it has been scattered in all of different ministries, in Foreign Ministry, in MOFCOM, Ministry of Commerce, and even in the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education.
Right.
But now, all those things now putting together, that will have a very good, I think, this organized way, harmonized way.
Right. David, clearly a lot of issues were discussed, domestic and foreign as well. From an African perspective, though, what were your takeaways?
I think for Africa, and in my view, the big lesson was that indeed, perhaps this discussion and debate around democracy and its values needs to be rethinked. And what I mean is that, we've had a very fixed view about what democracy is and what it should be, and the kind of fruits that should come out of democracy. But what we're seeing from China's story is we are seeing, huge population coming out of poverty, a country moving into almost the first world and actually beginning to set the world agenda. But I think the big lesson on democracy for Africa is actually you can be able to sort of set your own path, when it comes to issues of democracy, because in the end, Africa's experience with democracy has been sort of like a failed experiment to some extent. And the stories even within Africa, we are seeing the Rwanda story where, there was a lot of clamor for President Kagame to remain in office, given the kind of momentous change that he was bringing to the country. And this is what actually China is echoing. And so the lesson for us as Africa is, can we actually begin to rethink what democracy means, given the kind of desires that we want in terms of socioeconomic aspirations?
Right. Mithika in Johannesburg, though, give us your thoughts as well on your takeaways from the two sessions.
Well, I think my colleagues have captured it, but the most important thing is to look at the China's position in the global, current global geopolitics. Is playing a fundamentally important role in shaping the global economic, political, socio and diplomatic affairs of the world in a big way. And in a current situation where we have the United States ceding that usual and natural position of as a global leader, then the China, among other emerging economies, should be binding to take up that leadership. But the question when it comes to Africa then is, what kind of relationship are we going to have with China? Are we going to have the sweeping narrative of the West has been democracy, whereas that kind of democracy has been misinterpreted and, of course, driving on their interest, not the interest of Africa.
Right.
And so, what we need to ask ourselves then is what kind for China now, and this is a big question. Is it the issue of democracy? Should it be combined with the development, and how should this come?
I'd like to get the thoughts of Professor He Wenping here, because Professor, you did mention as well that one of the big issues that has come out of the two sessions is in terms of China assisting in world economic recovery here. And of course, President Xi himself did mention that the Chinese dream now has gone global. And some of the principles that are coming out is how China is going to promote globalization and free trade, promote connectivity under the Belt and Road Initiative. Particularly, though, what does this mean for the world?
Oh, yes. As you rightly put forward, nowadays in this planet, we are facing two kinds of different developing trends. One is calling for like deglobalization, even want to introduce kinds of those trade protectionism. And another trend is still like a push for this globalization, but will be inclusive globalization and also holding high the flag of this free trade. I think China belongs to the second one. So if we still remember, last year, President Xi Jinping, he went to the Davos in Switzerland to join the economic, the World Economic Forum. So he made a very influential speech. So in his speech, he has been calling for all those countries continue to push this inclusive globalization, and also continue to promote the free trade. Because without this free trade, we cannot imagine if all those countries, especially those leading economy in the world, they're all doing the things just for their own good, like make yourself first, make yourself greater, and never think about the other country, and even erected those tariff and also those quota bars and the protectionism for their own domestic market. Yeah, that's not good for the world economy. Nowadays, we are in this era of globalization, in the era of information era. You cannot just cut all those flow of information, cut all those flow of people's flow, commodity flow.
Right. Let me get your thoughts, David, because promoting connectivity through the Belt and Road Initiative is also going to be one of the issues that will be the main focus at the upcoming FOCAC Summit. What do you see, how do you see this building up for Africa, though?
I think this is a very exciting period for Africa. And I say exciting because China being one of the major global world leaders as an emerging nation, but also as a country that has shown dedicated commitment in terms of even putting up funds for infrastructure development with regard to the One Belt, One Road policy. And so Africa, in tandem with that, for a long time has not had the kind of support, external support from its partners to develop its own agenda driven by its own priorities. And so for the first time we are seeing a policy that is Africa driven with the possibility of having support from a nation such as China coming in to support that. I think the language for China has really changed in terms of their responsibility and what they view themselves as their role, the role that they play in the globalization. And I'd just like to mention that they see themselves as a nation that would perhaps be able to provide a bridge so that they can sit around a round table with Africa as an equal partner, so that everyone has a win-win situation. And that's something that Africa has not had for a long time. And so if you look at the African Agenda 2063, which is basically predicated around putting in place infrastructure that Africa requires, putting in place one big African market, and things such as having the African passport. Right. These are things that are very big flagship projects for the Agenda 2063. And why I say I'm very positive about this is that for the first time you have a nation that actually will let Africa do things according to its own agenda, and that's very important.
Professor He, has the role of China, though, are we seeing a different role of China coming out of the two sessions, a China that wants now to take a more prominent role in international affairs?
Yes, I think China's role in the international trade, international affairs now, of course, is rising. With this, I mentioned before, our economical growth, I think, has been contributing for more than 30% for the global economic growth. Especially that's why even ever since 2013, the Chinese government under the leadership of President Xi Jinping has put forward this One Belt, One Road initiative. So this initiative will further connect China, our domestic market, and with the outside market. And also will have a very good use for China's #1 foreign exchange reserve. So with this #1 foreign exchange reserve, now we would like to not only buy in some American treasury bond, and we are using them to do those infrastructure investment, right. So to do this connectivity. So that things, I think, will give a big push for this still, struggling for recovery of this world economy.
Right. One, of course, the focus for China has been on economic and socio-cultural issues. What can Africa learn, though, from these situations?
It is an opportunity for African countries' development. Now, as you have mentioned, that the Western countries are focused more inward-looking than outward. And for China, for African countries, the only question is, do we have that necessary infrastructure to absorb, and for that necessary partnership? And that is actually the question we have to ask ourselves. But the answer is, as my colleague who has just spoken has said, is that we have really Africa as the Agenda 2063, which really lays bare on what our priorities as a continent are. And is this more integration of Africa, One Passport, and many others. We have recognized that in order for our development to take off, we have to open our markets for bigger picture kind of context which we find ourselves in the world. Look at what has happened even in the BRICS. The BRICS is coming up as a very powerful platform for South-South cooperation, among other initiatives. So I think the issue of China cannot be really ignored in the current global diplomatic and political affairs. What we need in Africa is whether we do not have that necessary, whether we have that requisite infrastructure for that partnership, so that it becomes a win-win situation.
Right, David, are there development parallels though between China and Africa, which Africa can learn some homegrown solutions? Of course, riding on China's own successes that Africa can use for its own socio-economic changes?
Yeah, I think we've mentioned a few, but one that for me sticks out is the reorganization and institutional building around fighting corruption. I think that for me was something that Africa can learn from, because we know corruption is a big domestic problem even in China, and the reorganization that we saw is that even China as a government is ready to tackle this, and they've put the focus on anti-corruption. And so as Africa, we also have our own challenges with corruption, and ours are in fact much, much bigger. And so the focus that has lacked is we haven't institutionalized how we fight corruption, and so that we can eradicate corruption and achieve the kind of development that we want. And so one of the big things for me is perhaps look at how the Chinese government has reorganized its own bureaucracy in how they fight, they institute anti-corruption policies, and try to borrow and see lessons that can apply for Africa. I think that for me was one of the big ones.
Professor He, to you a final comment though. How will the new policies from these two sessions though impact China and Africa relations now moving forward over the next 5, 10, 15 years?
Oh yes, I think that will give another push for sure for China-African relations. As we just discussed, in this coming September, there will be another China-African summit. So this summit itself shows very clearly now China government and the Chinese people has this strong willing to close working with Africa, because China's development, it cannot work alone forward without Africans' partnership, and vice versa. So this is the thing. And another is now with this One Belt, One Road, and I think not only those infrastructure connectivity and China's those development experience, and also including some lessons we have did during the past. All those things, those are the softer things, not only those hard, those like a building or tangible things you see, you touch, but those experiences I think is also very valuable. So because now in Africa, we just talk about our friends saying politically how to strengthen those leadership issues. So leadership and also long-term those vision. Nowadays, a lot of African countries, they have been mapped out their industrialization, those plan, those vision, and also how to do the agricultural development. So all of that. So have the plan, and continentally have the 2063. So that's the long-term vision and the strategy, and also plus this strong leadership. All them together, and anti-corruption in the high level, official level, and on the bottom level for those people on the ground, and that will be like anti-poverty. So in China, we are entering into the new phase. It's called targeting those anti-poverty strategy to wish to get all those people still living under the poverty line, help them out of the poverty until the year 2020. So there are lots of ways to realize this goal. So those experiences can be shared with our African friends, when African countries also doing the same goals.
All right, Professor He Wenping, we'll leave it there for the moment, but that's all we have time for this week. But thank you to my guests for their insights. In Beijing, Professor He Wenping, Director of the African Studies at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. In Johannesburg, Mithika Mwenda, PhD candidate at the School of Governance of the University of the Witwatersrand. And with me in Nairobi, David Owiro, independent consultant, analyst of economic and political affairs in Africa. And remember, you can join the conversation online through Facebook, Twitter and YouTube, and do join us again next week for more Talk Africa. From me, Beatrice Marshall, it's goodbye.